Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome to the System Simplified podcast. I'm Adi Klevit, and this is the podcast where I interview top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and implement processes and procedures for businesses so they can grow and scale. And today's guest, I'm very excited to introduce Chris Manley. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Great to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And before we start, I have to give a big thank you to John Corcoran from Rise 25 that introduced us. And Rise 25, for those of you who do not know, it's a company that basically helps people increase their client base by podcasting. So they are producing this podcast, and they have been since the beginning, and they're an amazing company. So check it out, Rise 25. And of course, I also have to give a shout out to Carl Smith from the Bureau of Digital, which I also interviewed for this podcast. And you and John are part of the Bureau of Digital, and that's how we got introduced, because that's how you met John. So it's big networking here through podcasts, through knowing people throughout the basically the US and the world through the ability to interview and use a podcast. So that again goes back to why podcast is so good and so beneficial to businesses. But
Very
now,
much so.
Absolutely. So now let's get back to our special guest here. So Chris, let me introduce you, and then I would like for you to add more to it. So you are the CEO of Engenius, which is a marketing and digital. It's basically a digital marketing agency, web design and digital marketing agency in South Carolina. And you co-founded the agency in 2008, and you grew it tremendously to where it is today. Not only do you do that, but you also do nonprofit work, and you have a 503c, you have a nonprofit organization that helps build houses, right, for low-income family in South Carolina. So that's amazing, because you are definitely also contributing back to the community. And I'm excited to have you on this podcast today, because we're going to discuss systematization. You have done that. I mean, you are not only going to just talk, you're going to also explain how you have done that, and that's how you grew your business. And the main topic that I'm very excited about covering today is basically that you systematize responsiveness. And that allowed you to grow the business and really differentiate you from other companies, because you have a system of responding, which is very important. And that is an area that a lot of business owners have difficulties or not doing as well as they could, because they get overwhelmed, right? They ramp up their marketing, and then they get a lot of responses, and then they don't respond, right? And then you just basically waste all those leads. It creates ill will. It just doesn't contribute to the goodwill and the reputation within the community, because I'm sure, you can advertise digitally and online, but it's also your, especially when you deal with the medium-sized business community, it's also your word of mouth and the referrals, etc. So you definitely want to be responsive. So we're going to discuss that and really figure out how you developed that system so our listeners can benefit from it.
That sounds great.
Awesome. So first of all, anything else in terms of introducing you? Would you like to tell us a little bit more about the company, about how you started it, anything that you feel like our listeners should know?
Sure. So we started the company, it was, a little over 15 years ago now. And really the primary drive behind starting the company was a combination of one, creating a great place for people to work. That's a big part of who we are. It's a big part of what we do. We care a lot about our people, but also being a resource for small businesses. We saw that there were a lot of marketing companies in the community that, they may have served small businesses at one point in time, but as the company aged and as the company grew, so did the size of client they were serving. And for us, I grew up in a family of people involved in different small businesses, and I've worked in a lot of small businesses. I've seen a lot of them. They need a solid partner, and so some of our clients we've had for well over a decade now, and we continue to serve them, and we continue to be a great fit for them. We're just really passionate about being that tried and true, consistent provider and partner for the clients that we're serving. And we don't have an eye to size out of the clients we're serving. We love serving businesses that are in that small business space, and that kind of gets us up in the morning. It's what gets us excited about every day.
That's great. That is really good.
Yeah.
One of the things that I do when I interview a potential client or interview anyone that is interested in processes or systems is I ask them, why document processes and procedures, right? And the main common answers that I get is consistency, is risk mitigation, it's helping with onboarding, with basically with when they hire, so onboarding, training, and also employee retention, because as you said, you are creating a great place to work in, and part of it is basically having those well documented processes and procedures. Then also, if they want to sell the business or they want to make it more of an asset, right? You want to have those processes documented. So those are the main reasons why processes need to be documented, right? And I recently interviewed Jessica Fialkovich, who is a business broker, and she's an expert in the area. She wrote a book, and I asked her why processes and procedures are so important for a business. And she gave a whole explanation about how it allows the owner to basically for the business to operate independently of the owner. So that's a big one as well, right? So when I asked you before we start recording, one of the things that you mentioned is that by having those processes and procedures, you were able to create consistency in the business.
Absolutely. And
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to mention it's kind of ironic. The reason, all those things are very valid reasons to have systems, and we've learned that over time. But the reason that we actually started with building systems in the organization wasn't necessarily first and foremost any of those things. It was simply to have less stress. When we built our first systems as a company and really talked through our processes, there were two of us. It was myself and my co-founder, and we were the only employees in the organization. We each had distinct roles in the organization, and so we could have easily done it without systems. It was just he did what he did and I did what I did, and we do it the same way every time. We're not trying to teach anybody else. But we realized that having those systems in place really created a lot less stress for us. It gave us this template every time that we go through any kind of action as an organization, whether it's meeting with a prospective client for the first time of, hey, how do we learn enough about this person to see if they're a good fit for us to work with? How do we learn enough about this person to see if we have services that they can really benefit from? Likewise, when we build a website for them, let's write down what steps we take in doing that, because it helps make sure that we don't get stressed out. We don't end up with these surprises at the end of a project of, oh my gosh, we totally forgot to do this step. And we're having to scramble and go back and do it because the deadline's tomorrow. And now we're up at, 11:30 at night trying to put it all together because we didn't follow a system. And so the origin of our system, while all of those other things you mentioned are great benefits of it, it actually came about a little bit more organically than that. And we simply, doubled down in systems along the way because of all those other things, because it does help us to teach new employees, new team members that are coming on board. It helps us to teach them how to do certain tasks. It enables us to tell a client, this is exactly what you can expect before you even start working with us. This is what's going to happen. And then they start working with us, and that's what happens. It's the way we do things.
So it's predictability. Other than
exactly.
You have the consistency because consistency is such a big word. I mean, you can have consistency of operations, so you can actually get the final result, right? So that is definitely a consistency. But what you're also saying, you're adding on it, is that you can also very confidently tell the client, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Client, this is what we are going to achieve here because we know that this can be done, because we can predict the solution at the end, because we have a system on how to do it.
Exactly. And that's super, super important. When we started with our website system, a lot of what we do is building websites. We built hundreds and hundreds of websites using the system. It literally started out as a 13-point system on a piece of loose leaf notebook paper. We have it somewhere in the office. I keep telling the team we need to get it framed and put it on the wall, just to remind us that this is where we came from. Because all of our team knows that today our system for building websites is 184 steps, and that's because over time we've improved that system. We've created more consistency in what we can deliver to clients. But I think it's also important to point out it doesn't lead us to doing things in this robotic fashion. It's not, I say 184 steps, and somebody could hear that and say, "Oh, so this is basically just AI using humans." Instead of artificial intelligence. No, no, no. It's 184 checkpoints along the way to ensure that we've taken every step, that we've talked with the client to make sure there's alignment on the project, that we take the project through a testing phase before it launches to make sure that we're working out bugs before it actually goes live and we have users on the site. We want to make sure that all of those things are done because it helps improve the end product. It helps improve what the experience that our clients have. They can feel assured that this is a process that we have continually refined over a decade now, and that this is a tested product. It's not just us willy-nilly saying, "Hey, let's go build you a website. We're not really sure what steps we're going to take, but we hope a website will come out at the end." It's like, no. We run this system, and every single time we run the system, the end result is a really well-crafted product that meets the needs of our clients. But there's a lot of conversation along the way. It takes a lot of conversation between different team members, between us and the client, to make sure that we're refining it the right way. These are just making sure that those steps take place.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I agree with you. You do have to have those documented, but you can't take the human factor, the human element out of it, because then it becomes really like just a machine, right? But here you are actually adapting it to each and every client. And that's what makes it personal. Especially a website is so important that it reflects the client in front of you. And it's not a cookie cutter, right? Because it has to reflect their personality. It has to reflect who they are. I mean, that is the front gate where it's kind of like the, if you have a store, right, that would be the storefront. It has to reflect who you are, not somebody else. So those points, as you were mentioning, it also allows quality control, right? Because it's that the product at the end is going to be good because you have all those checkpoints. And, and as you were talking, I was thinking, probably some people think, oh, this is overwhelming, like, 84 or 185 steps, right? So what would you say to business owners when they will say, well, Chris, this sounds very overwhelming?
Yeah, I think the thing that I love in communicating this to clients and really walking through it is there are 184 steps that you're paying us to make sure happen. For the client, they don't see all 184 steps. They don't need to. That's why we're here. If they want to go build their own website, there are 184 steps that they can take to do it. But the reason they're working with an agency is, one, to get an outside perspective, and two, to work with someone where there are only a handful of steps along the way that we really need a lot of engagement from the client. A lot of these things are things that we're doing on their behalf to make sure they happen to produce a really solid end result. And so, we're taking 184 steps. We love those 184 steps. We love the rhythm that we get to go through and the fact that we always know what's next. But for the client, there are probably only, I guess, about half a dozen different spots along the way where we really have a lot of interaction, where the client's, needing to put some time into it. And ironically enough, part of our system, not in building the website, but in building a proposal for a client and showing them what the work is going to look like, is actually outlining for them exactly what steps they're going to need to be involved in along the way. And we even estimate about how much time that's going to take them. And so, we don't just have systems for building the website. We also even have a system around building a proposal for a client, to show them this is what to expect when you're working with us.
Absolutely. And we're going to touch on that because I'm very interested in that. But my question, I guess, on the 185 steps or 184 steps was more also directed internally, because, there can be a business owner that would say, wow, this can totally overwhelm my staff if I give them 184 steps. What would you say to that?
Yeah, for our team, it's not 184 steps that I just went off for a week into some cabin in the woods and came up with and came back and told them, here are 184 steps that you need to take. This is a system that, again, I created the first one. And the thing I love about it is when I look at the current one, it doesn't look anything like what I originally created. I've had a lot of input along the way, but really it's the team is who has refined this system to 184 steps. They're the people who have determined what additional steps do we need? When do we no longer need a step in the process? And so we've continued to refine it over time. And so our whole team really respects the system that we have because they made it. And they continue to make it. It's not a set in stone thing. Today it's 184. Whenever this podcast airs, that may be a different number. We're constantly debriefing every project after we finish, running through the project and really analyzing what went well, what didn't. And that's the primary way that we identify, hey, there might be a new step that we need to add. Or, hey, we've got these 3 different steps in here, but we can really consolidate this into one step because it doesn't need to be spread out this much. Or maybe there's a step that's outdated, that's no longer necessary. And so we're constantly looking at how do we make this system the best way that it can to maximize our efficiency, but also keep our stress, at a low level. I think uncertainty breeds a lot of stress. We don't have a whole lot of uncertainty. We know that if we follow this system, 98% of the time, everything's going to go really well and it's going to go smoothly. And that's a benefit to everybody.
That's a key. That's a key. If the system is followed, then you know that you have the certainty and the predictability, which I love. Okay, so now let's talk about the system that you have to create a proposal and to also for responsiveness. That is, I think that's it's like they're going to, our listeners are really going to benefit from it. Almost every podcast that I create, I like to interview, and when I interview my guests, I just like to extract the system, a type of system. So we have systems for follow-up after that, right? Or systems for customer service, or systems for creating a safety culture. Or when I interview an insurance agent, as an example, that was the episode with Joshua Keane. I interviewed a sales process, like how to create a sales process that works, human resources, hiring. Mm-hmm. I am interviewing there is an interview with Judy Weber where we're going to talk about the hiring process. So I'd like to talk to you about your system of how you create a good proposal and how do you actually have a system for responsiveness.
Yeah. So I guess first and foremost, we're believers in just having systems around anything that we can put them around. It just creates consistency. It tells us exactly what we need to do. It ensures that we don't have missing pieces along the way. It's frustrating when you just have something that totally gets missed, and then you have to go back and you have to clean up and do damage control and everything else. And so even if it's a 3-step system versus a 184-step system, we like just putting those systems around it. And so one of the beliefs that we have as a company is that responsiveness to our clients, to people that reach out to us, is paramount. The longer you wait to get back to somebody, the more that person's going to feel ignored. And that's not a feeling that anybody should need to feel. If somebody has a need, we want to be able to address that need as quickly as we can. And so, part of the building systems around this was setting first and foremost, setting an expectation. What is the expectation for responsiveness, for how quick we get back to people? And the way that I've always put this to our team is that I only ever want that to be measured in minutes. I don't want us to measure that in hours. I don't want us to measure that in how many days did it take to respond to someone, whether it's a prospective client that's calling us to see if we're a good fit to work with them, whether it's an existing client that has an issue with their site or needs to change content on their site and reaches out to us. I only want us to measure those in minutes. And I think setting that standard has helped our team realize that, hey, we don't want to take more than an hour to get back to anybody. We want to get back to them within 60 minutes. Because once you go over that, you are tempted to measure it in hours. So, maybe it took us 17 hours on average to get back to people, or maybe it took 3 days on average to get back to people. Those aren't acceptable. Those aren't good. I mean, you and I wouldn't want to be responded to, in that way. When we need help with something, we generally want to feel like the company we're talking to cares about us. And so we measure that in minutes. And so we had to build a system around, not just how to actually respond, but also who's on call to respond when. We only respond during business hours. We're very respectful of our employees. We want this to be a positive environment for them. So we work during business hours. We do have some emergency systems set up for if something happens after hours. But 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're here for our clients, and within that time frame, we make sure that we have people that are kind of on call, throughout that time, where there's no period of time, Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5, on Friday from 9 to noon. We have people assigned to make sure that they get back to people, and they're people that know enough, that are educated enough about what people might need, depending on whether it's a prospective client calling, whether it's an existing client calling, no matter who it is. They know how to get enough information from them so that we can then take next steps and really make sure that person's getting the service that they need. And so, building that is not just thinking through, okay, once somebody does answer the phone, or receives the email, what are the next steps that they take? It's also thinking about what is the system for ensuring that someone's actually sitting in front of you, that someone's actually sitting next to a phone when it rings to be able to answer it, or if they're on the other line, as soon as they get off that call, to check the voicemail and listen to the message and get back to somebody promptly. So I think some people could say that we've gone overboard with systems, that we have way too many. We actually don't have all that many. We have the ones that we need to make sure that we can do things consistently, and that we can really care for our clients. Absolutely.
So I think, from what I hear is, like, first of all, you have to establish a policy, internal policy, in terms of like what is an acceptable, and what is basically the minimum threshold in terms of responsiveness, right? So everybody knows, everybody's on the same page. Then you have to establish who is going to be responsible for responding, so nobody drops the ball, right? So that's, first of all, you have to establish that. You also, from working with clients and establishing policies and procedures for them, or the processes and procedures on how they do things, you can establish the responsiveness, but then within it, you can also establish what's the urgency to respond. So the first thing you can do is you can respond, but according to the issue at hand, you can say, I received the email and I will respond. My team is working on it, and you'll get a response within 72 hours, which is acceptable. But at least the client knows, okay, we know by Wednesday we are going to get a response, right? If this is like, let's say, Friday or Monday. But it's also something, it's urgent. It's also important to actually define what is urgent and what has to be responded within hours, right? So that's all part of that procedure or that policy on what it's more of a policy, because it's guidelines, right? And then you can create the processes and procedures around how to respond. Like, what if that, like, maybe you can have email templates, so you can have certain procedures of what you follow if a certain question is being asked. There is also, I experience also, if you have, like, you frequently asked questions, then you can just copy it from there but again, use the human element. What I don't like, and I don't know how you feel about it, is like, when I ask a question and say, well, you can look at our frequently asked questions, no, this is not, it's just right. But you can, internally, you can use that resource. You can get the text and you can say, here is the answer to your question. And, feel free to ask any other questions. And here are also some resources for you to look at, right? Because otherwise it gets, you want to make sure they feel welcomed to ask any questions, because you want people to ask you questions. So that can be part of responsiveness, right? What about the system to create a proposal? You mentioned that you have a system to create a proposal. So what's your system for that?
Yeah, so that system really begins with, on the front end, it has nothing to do with proposal. In the initial steps, it's all about how we communicate with the client and asking certain questions. There are pieces of information that we need on the front end before we ever get to a proposal stage to find out, one, is the client actually a good fit to work with us? Do they have a need that a service that we provide can help resolve? And are they a good fit to work with us? Do they have the resources necessary to work with us? Are they a good cultural fit to work with us? Are our teams really going to work well together? Or do we already perceive that there's going to be some conflict because we have different values as companies? And so we really have a lot of questions that we ask people at the very beginning stages to figure those things out. And even to some extent, we have questions that we ask to even figure out, what do they need? We have a lot of people that come to us and say, we need a new website. and we start asking them some key questions about their company and about what what they need this website for, really to understand what's driving the decision making behind this. And every once in a while we'll ask some questions, and the response is, um, hmm, we really need to think about that. Let us do some internal thinking and get back to you. And whether it's a few weeks later, whether it's 3 months later, we hear back from them. We're like, that really sparked a great conversation in our organization about why did we think we needed this in the first place. And in some cases it means that we don't end up. I mean, they don't end up buying anything, and that's fine with us. We want our clients to be successful, even if we've never worked with them yet. It's important that people are ready for the services that we provide, and so we do a little bit of vetting. We have to tell some people no. We have to help some people realize that maybe going into a branding exercise is not your next step. Maybe you need to figure out a little bit more about who is your customer base, and really explore that before you figure out how do we need to position ourselves. Because if you don't understand your customers, you're not going to get very far. And that's something in some cases we can help you with, but we're also not the owners of your company. We're not the people in charge of strategic planning for your company or thinking about where your company wants to be in 3 years. You've got to make those decisions. You've got to think those things through. And so that systematic process that, yes, in many cases, it will result in a proposal. It begins with foundational questions about understanding a client company and really understanding what are their needs, are the things that they think they need really what they need, and getting those figured out before we ever get to a spot of saying, hey, here's exactly what it would look like for us to take these next steps. Because a website's not a be all end all product. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing. Just like when you go to the car lot, not every car is going to work for you. I remember when my family was very young and we were first starting to grow as a family, we realized very quickly that the small 4-door hybrid sedan that we had with a really tiny trunk was not going to work well for traveling with a new baby and a dog and all of the things that came with them. We needed something bigger. Whereas for some people, that car would have been great. We've got to make sure that what we're providing someone really fits. And that's part of the benefit of having a system around, we call it our discovery process that we have with any prospective client. And, we can stop that process at any point in time. We can hit, marks in that process where it's like, hey, I just don't know that this is what you need right now.
Yeah.
But
and part of
it's important to document what you do.
It is important to document it because part of it is also knowing what questions to ask and be consistent with those questions. So then you can train new salespeople or estimators or whatever your industry is. But it is very important to also make sure that you actually have the questions and know what to look for. So that's part of the system as well. And then do you have also systematized, like let's say you decided it is a good fit. What do you do next in terms of the proposal?
Yeah, and that's kind of the latter part of that system is really working to figure out, okay, in some cases we're having to, in some cases the questions we asked, the answers that we received were enough for us to figure out, hey, this is what they need because it matches something that is a little bit more typical for us to do. In some situations we have to say, hey, there's so many options in front of us that our next step really is to go through a little bit more intensive discovery process where, we're going to come up with the client's going to pay us, a certain amount that'll go towards the end project, to really dig a little bit deeper to identify things in a little bit more specificity because they have some unique aspects of what they're trying to do, or they're not quite sure how to organize something in a certain way. And so we need to dig into that a little bit more to really figure out the best way to do that. And so, it's our processes sometimes are very much, I remember growing up, there were these books that are called Choose Your Own Adventure. And, you get to the end of the first chapter and it says, did Tom go left or did Tom go right? And you get to pick. And if he went left, you turn to this page and you keep reading. If he went right, you turn to this other page and you can create your own adventure. A lot of our systems have to be that way because, some of the prospective clients that we're talking to, their needs may resemble a lot of other clients we have, and they figured enough of the answers out, before they even called us to know, okay, we can go ahead and prepare a proposal. We have a really good idea of what they need, and we're really confident in that. There are other clients, either because their product is very complex, their service is complex, maybe they still have some internal questions that we can help guide them in answering. we need to go down a slightly different path where we go ahead and engage with each other to get a little bit deeper, to do some consultative work with them, to really make sure that what we're proposing in the long run is really the best fit for them and really what they need. And so, every one of our systems also has divergent paths like that, that help ensure that we're asking the right questions, but then also tell us internally, this is based on the answers that we're getting, this is the next pathway. So that whether Corey on our team is the first person to reach out and talk to them and go through this process with them, whether Randall is that person, whether Samantha is that person, it doesn't matter which person they talk to on our team, they're all able to follow this process and ensure that we're really proposing to the client as close as possible. This is what you actually need. And these are the resources that it's going to take to do that.
Absolutely. And, and I think what is really important, because you have systems, it's not dependent on one person. Because I experienced it with myself, with my company, like people want to work with me, but because let's say I'm the first person who talks to them, but I make sure that each one of my team members is actually trained and they are as good, if not better than I am, because they can service the client. But I also experience it the other ways when I engage the company and I feel that only the owner can understand me, because I feel like the staff have no idea what me and the salesperson or the owner talked about, then I don't have confidence, right? So I think what you're talking about also is create that confidence that anyone on the team can service the client. And that is part of the it's very important in the process of creating a proposal, because when you are creating it, it's important for the salesperson, whomever that is, because that's where the bonding happens, because that the person that signs up understands, has the emotional connection to the salesperson, and they understand that person is actually understanding them. That's why they sign up. They like the product, but they also have that, especially when you buy services, right? Not just a product, you can see the product, but the service, you get that confidence, you get that connection. So it's very important to pass that connection and that confidence along to the rest of the group. And I think that should also be part of the process in terms of assuring that, okay, well, Samantha on my team, she's an expert at that. She's you can even, if it's true, she might be even better than I am at that. And that's what you need. And I want you to get you like in expert hands. And because we have processes in place, and because we are consistent, and we can predict the consequences and the final result, you're in great hands. So that's where also I think should be the handoff from sales to the actual delivery. It has to be smooth, true, honest, and that can only be achieved if you really have internal systems to do that.
Absolutely. And that's, one of the other things that I love is, so we have multiple project managers on staff who, each of them oversees certain projects to get them through to fruition. Well, a real life scenario we're facing this year is our two project managers, both of them are getting married this year. And so there's going to be a period of time that, right before the wedding and after the wedding, where each of them are going to be out of the office. And the beauty in having these systems is that there's not a single client project that'll be derailed because either one of them are out. Because when one of them is out, the other one can pick up and see, hey, this is exactly where all of my colleagues' clients are and all the projects are in progress. They can keep things running while that other person's out. And then vice versa, when the other person is going to be out for 2 weeks, they can very easily, jump in and we never miss a beat. So, the person you're talking to on the other end for 2 weeks may change over to somebody else. We're able to keep the projects consistently going to create minimal disruption for our clients. And that's, but without systems, we couldn't do that. Each project manager would likely have their own process, their own system, to where neither one of them could really help each other out. But having the same systems in place allows each of them to really lean on each other, which for us creates a great work environment. But we also know that it creates a great client experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so true. Well, Chris, you've been definitely a wealth of information, and for sharing. Thank you for sharing all those best practices with our
Absolutely.
listeners. And hopefully we got them inspired, right, to document and to create systems.
Oh, yeah.
And you just showed that you can totally be creative and have good systems, and that's a winning combination. So in
Absolutely.
closing, So in closing, I always like to ask a book or a mentor or a podcast that you like to listen to, something that inspired you in this vein of what we were talking about in terms of systematize the business, or even inspired you in life. So what, if you had to share something with our listeners, what would that be?
Yeah, so one of the earliest books that I ever read in business, and I recommend to any entrepreneur that's out there, is a book called The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. It's a fairly short read. It's a quick read. It's a story that he tells along the way, but it does two things. One, it helps someone really understand that there's a difference between being a maker, producing something. If you get really excited about building a product, about doing something, individual, then you need to do that and go work for somebody else to do that. But if you really enjoy building a business and working on the business and building these processes and systems, that's a different thing. So really discerning which one of those you are. The other thing he talks about in the book is just the need for systems, for all the reasons that we've talked about today. And it really set a great foundation for me in respecting the need for systems and even being a guide in how to build those. There are a lot of E-Myth resources that are out there that you can go on Google and find pretty quickly that just help guide a newer entrepreneur or someone who hasn't had as much experience in really a systems-based business to really appreciate systems a little bit more and to have a little bit of a starting point of, as you look across your organization, what systems do you need? Because it's everywhere from sales to marketing to, operations and fulfillment. You also need systems around things like accounting and bookkeeping and HR. They can really streamline your organization and really take a lot of stress out. So I highly recommend the book. And I highly recommend really taking some of the steps from the book in building those systems in your organization.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I mean, that's what we do day in and day out, and definitely having those systems in place for every part of the organization is very, very important for all the reasons that we covered throughout this podcast. So Chris, thank you again for being a guest. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.